I just want to welcome everybody. For those who don't know, I'm Latanya Lane with People's Action Institute, and welcome back to Building a Bigger We, our popular education talks for the people. It's our new book club. We just started it this year, and this is the fourth episode in our series with Vanessa Priya Daniel, who we'll hear from in a minute. She is incredible, and it's going to be such a great conversation. But before we jump into that incredible conversation, I want to thank every single one of you for being here, whether it's your first time or if you're back for more after our first three conversations. We are so grateful that you are here.
101,000%. Thank you, Latanya. I appreciate that. It's hard to believe, like I said earlier, that we're already halfway through this journey with you. We're 4 months into building a bigger we, which really is what we do here at People's Action Institute every single day.
That is so true, Devante. Really, everything we do at People's Action Institute is to say, welcome. You have a home here. So we can all see and feel that we are stronger together because there's always room for every single one of us on the freedom side of this fight. That's one reason I'm so excited to talk with today's guest, Vanessa Priya Daniel. But here's a pro tip. You can also call her V. Apparently her friends can do that in People's Action. We're family these days.
Yes.
So her book, Unrig the Game, What Women of Color Can Teach Everyone About Winning, has so many insights that we can apply right now to our work as organizers, especially in this moment of rising authoritarianism. So let's get to it. But first, Devante, can you please tell us a little bit more about the series?
Of course, I can do that, Latanya. I appreciate you. So like I said, this is episode 4 of our first series of the Bigger We Book Club, and it's been extremely fire. We've talked with Loretta Ross, Maria Stephan, Jason Negron Gonzalez, and Max Elbaum, and I tell you, they have some wisdom to share. But don't take it from me. Don't take it from us. Check it out for yourself. Our first 3 episodes are all on our YouTube channel, and trust me, you won't regret it. We're going to drop the link for you in chat if it's not already there. I appreciate you, Tim, as always. And you can go to www.youtube.com/ at People's Action. And don't forget, sign up for our next session. That's Friday, August the 28th. And we'll talk with Stephanie Luce, professor of labor studies at CUNY, and a guiding light of the Mayday Strong movement in New York City. So she'll be talking about Practical Radicals, 7 strategies to change the world, which she co-wrote with Deepak Bhargava. And you don't want to miss it. So if you don't want to miss it, sign up at peoplesaction.org/bigger we. So tell me the truth. Do you like our little book club? Do you want it to continue, or do you want us to talk with your favorite organizer or author? Let us know what you'd like to hear. Let us know what you want us to feature, and send us your ideas at biggerwe@peoplesaction.org.
That is right. This book club works because of you, and we want to hear from you. Our guests are always so excited to know that they get to have questions from the audience. They want to hear from you too. So please, if you have any questions for Vanessa today, like we always do, make sure to drop them in the chat right now, or as the conversation's going, if you have some questions that pop up, feel free to drop them in the chat. We'll get to as many of them as we can. Now, I have quite a few questions for Vanessa. I do, but I don't want to keep her all to myself. So before we dig in, please join me in welcoming our executive director, our fearless leader, Suma Arias. Welcome, Suma.
Thank you, Latanya. Thank you, Devante. I love the space that you all have created for us. When I saw the list of what you had coming up and this specific author and book on the list, I've been looking forward to it. I am going to get emotional about it because this book was one of the books that touched a part in my life. It's one of the books that you read, it awakens all kinds of emotions, but then you buy and you give it to women and people you love and respect, and this is one of those books. So am I am so excited, Vanessa, that and I am so appreciative of the fact that you've put so much into this and that you are here with us today. I really want to dig in and get others to experience you in this conversation. But more than anything, I want to really appreciate what you have done and what you've created for us, women of color, by writing this book, by being so vulnerable yourself to address a topic and issues that a lot of us women of color in this work, I've been in it myself for 30 years, had kept in silence. It's one of the things that, sometimes we get criticized or take on a lot of flack for talking about, but you went to a part of that conversation that is so important to have, and you did it in such a beautiful way that even though it's a hard topic that we all need to be talking about, you held it in such a beautiful way that made us feel seen and vindicated and affirmed and yet held and powerful. Um, I am excited that you are here with us today because I believe there is a cost to us not having this conversation. And that cost is hurting our movement. Because if we suffer through these things alone, if we don't talk about them, we haven't formed enough community. So there tends to be burnout, and doing this alone is hard. That work is hard enough as it is. And our movement needs to decide, what do we do with the richness and the wisdom and the gifts that women of color bring. So I hope everyone gets into the book. Vanessa, I have so much admiration for you, and I am so excited that you're here. I think everyone should be having this conversation. And what I want to ask of all of you here is that you and your organization should all be having this conversation. And Vanessa's team is amazing. Please, I'm going to say it at the top of this call, and I know we're going to repeat it again and again, but you need to go to vanessapriyadaniel.com and engage in this conversation with Vanessa and with her team. I am going to get out of the way and thank you, but to give this back to you, Latanya, and get into the conversation that I know will be incredible and powerful for everyone who was able to join today. Again, thank you, Vanessa. I appreciate you being here with us today.
Soma, thank you so much. It's always such a pleasure to hear from you, and it's been a pleasure to kind of have your insights about this book and how much it's meant for you. And I just like Soma said, there are a ton of resources that Vanessa and her team have put together, including how you can invite Vanessa to come and speak with your organization. I know that Tim is sharing his screen, so there are QR codes. I was like, there are little squares. No, there are QR codes that you can use to get those resources. If you can follow her on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, newsletter, Blue Sky, y'all. You can also go to www.vanessapriyadaniel.com/contact. And you can see about getting Vanessa to come and speak to your organization, come speak to your group, come speak at a conference. The book is brilliant. There are so many wonderful insights. And in our prep, just getting to hear Vanessa speak about her experience and what drove her to write this book, it is worth the time and energy to invite her into your organizations. She speaks about really difficult truths with a lot of compassion and a lot of invitation to bring people in and figure out how we can move forward together. So I just want to encourage folks to take the time to visit vanessapriyadaniel.com. And now let's get to it. Vanessa, hi, welcome. Oh,
Hey.
that mute button is always hard to find.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and for just, yeah, Devante, Latanya, Silma, Tim, everyone for just such a warm welcome. And Silma, thank you for the kind words. They mean the world, coming from you, someone who I have tremendous respect for. So yeah, excited to be here and excited to be here with all of you. Organizers are, y'all are my people. That's how I primarily identify. So I feel like I'm home and really, really excited to dig in.
Well, welcome home. Um,
Mhm.
I want to start by talking about just the way that you did this book. Like you shared your own experiences. There are beautiful stories in here about your family now and the family that you were raised in. You also invite the wisdom and smarts and experiences of 45 women of color who are leaders in our movement. And you get some heavy hitters in there, right? Like really legendary folks like Dolores Huerta, Loretta Ross, who we were lucky enough to interview on the podcast. And there were folks who, like you, came up in the last few decades and really cut your teeth on the issues of the early 2000s and current 2000s. I don't know how to talk about history right now. But I'm curious, in all those conversations that you had, what are some of the things that stick with you? Like, what are the gems from those conversations that you keep returning to?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I embarked on this book project with a lot of humility. Like, I've had success in leadership. I've also like skinned my knees a ton. So
Mm,
it was just, talking to 45 of my movement sheroes was an
yeah.
absolute masterclass for me. I mean, a few of the gems that I will never forget are Dolores Huerta telling me how much she hesitated before she stepped into leadership because
Wow.
she had to overcome how she had been socialized as a woman to feel uncomfortable about her own power.
Mm,
To hear her share how much she wants women to break free of the feeling that we're overstepping or being too feisty or bold whenever we step into our power, that was incredible.
yeah.
Another gem, Ashley Woodard Henderson, reminding us that in this time of TikTok and hashtags, that I love this quote from her that sound bites are not strategies. That
Okay.
whether we're talking about government or smaller scale systems, calls to just burn it all down without a plan to build its replacement are
Mm,
like neither strategic or nor responsible when we know that the most marginalized communities are going to be hit hardest when nothing has been built. So
that's
just
right.
hearing that, the gem of that being echoed by Lael Shruji, who was a student organizer of the Gaza encampments at
Mm,
Columbia, who said, we all agree empire must fall, but there needs to be concurrent work around what the future is that we're building to replace it. Um, oh gosh, a gem from Chrissy Castro, who folks may know as a tremendous Native woman and leader in the electoral space, reminding us that while collectives and flat structures can work well for many goals, most Indigenous government structures had clear hierarchies
mm,
and even clearer protocols for being elevated into leadership. So this kind of reminder to us that not all, as she says, not all power is unearned. The notion that all hierarchy is Eurocentric or white supremacist is actually ahistorical. I mean, this is like the digging in on some of that
yes.
hard stuff. And I'm kind of going there because I know this is like such a sophisticated group. But these gems, Denise Perry, who many folks know, we love Denise Perry from Bold, who's a leader in bringing somatics and healing justice into our movements, flagging, her clarity, saying that sometimes what people expect our organizations to deliver has gone too far, and her saying, I'm not responsible for all of your well-being. That's not the mission or the capacity of this organization. And that being echoed in so many, particularly Black women leaders I talked to, about how the demand to mammy is a
Mm,
major impediment to their leadership. And I guess last gem I'll share, like, so Latasha Brown, reminding us that people who believe they deserve a pass on hurting others because they're from a more oppressed group are not
mm,
just lacking in political education, they're lacking in values. And I think really seeing how we don't overcorrect in certain ways, and how women of color need to draw boundaries with some of the things happening in organizations, and her saying, to leaders, don't extend yourself. And appeal to people who are trying to hurt you. What's happening
Mm,
is hurtful, it's harmful, cut it off. You don't owe anyone space to tear down your character. At the same time, we hold that, of course, there needs to be critique, and as leaders, we have humility and are growing and changing all the time. So, um, I think just all of these gems. Jen saying, don't ever moderate your ambitions because you're afraid of failure, because you're told you're doing too much. It was just the honor of a lifetime to talk to these sisters. And there's so much for all of us to kind of nourish us, particularly in these times.
yeah, I One, I am just deeply impressed with your memory. It's as if you were reading it, but all from the dome. Well done. So, but I also feel like what strikes me about many of the reflections that you shared is like this deep pragmatism that's coming from people's experiences in the movement, people's experiences in their relationships with one another, with right? Like it just comes from people taking real honest reflection, people honestly reflecting on their experiences and being able to pull some wisdom that they can use in their leadership moving forward, and connecting with others. And I think that's one of the things that struck me about how you wrote this book. You really grounded it in your experience. From jump, you start talking about how you grew up queer, mixed race, a survivor. You talked about that not in abstract terms, but in really textured, detailed experiences of your family and the dynamics that were going on there, of the playground and the yard and what your relationships were there. You talked about how all of these things inspired you to come into movement. Can you talk a little bit more about what brought you into this work, what shaped your perspective, and a little bit why you chose to write the way that you did, what you
Mm.
gained from that?
Yeah, well, it was an interesting thing. This is like one of the things I fought the most with my editor, who's the wonderful Jamia Wilson at Random House,
Oh,
is,
she's
as
great.
organizers, we're trained, you put yourself in the back, right? You don't front ground your story. So it was like a lot of work that I had to do to try to bring my story into this. But, when people need to know who they're listening to and
Yes.
understand who you are. So I did try to share that in as vulnerable a way as I can, as I could. And with respect to the fact that every single one of us on this call has incredible stories that have brought us into organizing, and
Right.
I'm not alone in that. And there's a lot of echoes of my story and the stories of particularly women of color and movement. But I grew up a queer mixed race kid in Seattle, Washington in the 90s. It was a time when you could still expect to lose a lot of your friends and family when you came out of the closet. It was a time when, I'm half Sri Lankan and half white. It was a time when, until I left for college when I was, uh, uh, like 18, I had never laid eyes on another Sri Lankan person in the city that wasn't a member of my immediate family.
Wow.
So, for anyone on the call who's like grown up feeling like a freak nerd or weirdo, like you all are my people.
Mhm.
And I think that this gives us kind of an interesting perspective on life and kind of draws us into organizing in a particular way. I remember in the 90s that there were three genres of music that were really popular in Seattle. It was grunge, it was hip hop, and
Yeah.
then like lesbian folk music was also having a moment in the
Right.
90s. And so
Lilith
like
Fair.
my little brain, as a high school student, I thought, well, on face these genres look completely different. But in
Hmm.
a Venn diagram, there's one thing at the center that unites them all. And that is the flannel shirt over denim. At any given moment, Ice Cube, Tracy Chapman, Kurt Cobain, the Indigo Girls were all rocking some version of that outfit.
I have never
I
noticed that
said this
until this
feeling.
moment.
What this should tell you, a couple of things this tells you about me. One is that the fact that I
Yes.
was describing any of this as a Venn diagram tells you I was a huge nerd. But like the fact that, I'm thinking in this way is like I kind of had early organizing instincts because a good organizer
Yes.
for points of commonality and you work from there. So I would kind of
Yes.
build on that to bridge Black and brown home care workers when I was a labor organizer, to bridge wealthy donors and frontline communities, when I was doing donor and funder organizing. So, I think that not fitting in, I want us to
Mhm.
embrace that, those of us who have that history. And not fitting in also fostered in me both this like deep empathy for marginalized people and like this real respect for those who are marginalized, because that is generally who shows up a lot of times when you try to get
Mm.
free. And the first time I tried to get free was, which I call my first organizing experience, was at the age of 5 years old when I spoke out about sexual abuse from a relative. And
Yeah.
the response of my Sri Lankan side of the family, which had been my entire world for all the formative years of my life, was to set my mother and I adrift. So
Yeah.
that taught me a really key lesson. So at 5, the lesson I got was if you want to get free, you have to be willing to tell the brave truth. You
Mm.
have to be willing to lose the people who want to stay in the lie. Like it will break your heart. But
Yeah.
freedom is always worth it. It's always worth it.
Mm.
And you will find the people who stand with you. So, in that moment, I lost my family. My mother stood with me. A few years later, when I told the truth about racism that I was experiencing as a brown girl in a predominantly white city, my mother didn't stand with me around that. She didn't have the capacity to as a white woman who was still on her journey. But Black women in my city did.
Mhm.
Years later, when I came out as queer, some treasured friends and family turned their backs on me, but the queer community was there to welcome me into this,
Mm.
long tradition of chosen family and embrace me. So I think all these experiences, they shape me into, an organizer. And I try to do my best to do the brave and honest thing, to trust that the solidarity will be there. And, I think that's part of like writing this book. Soma, you talked about the silence. There's so much silence around this, right? Even though it's
Yeah.
so ubiquitous, but it's like that is organizing, right? It's having the courage to get over that wall of fear and break that silence. And we don't break it alone, we break it together. So that's why there's
Yeah.
45 sisters in this book. So that is um that is the work. And in this moment, we're in a climate of fear right now in this country. This is the work, not letting fear run us. How do we stay truthful, bold? How do we stand with each other? That's the work
Yeah.
right now.
I really appreciate that, especially um, this idea that, you speak the bold truth and the solidarity will catch you. Like, I think that's such a powerful message. And like that fear wants us to imagine that that maybe not is maybe not the case. So that's such a powerful reminder. And you talk about this moment when you are 5 and you speak the truth and it has huge repercussions. You talk about the moment where you are feeling like an outsider, but from that outside position, you notice similarities between groups that probably would not say there are similarities between them. Um, and you step in when you step into the world as an adult, you go into organizing. What was your first organizing work? Like how did you first become an organizer? And then as you've because you've organized like just across such a wide swath of the movement, like how has that movement across the movement, how has that changed your perspective over time?
Yeah, great question. These are such great questions. Well, my first love is writing, and I moved to Oakland, California, because I wanted to become a writer who would use writing to support movements. And I moved to Oakland because it's the home of the Panthers, and because a lot of folks I had met at the WTO protests in Seattle were from Oakland. And what I found pretty quickly was I didn't feel like I could, as a writer, do justice and be most productive in supporting movements until I understood where power and change came from. And I was clear that it came from organizing, and I needed to understand that. So I kind of set down my pen and I became a community organizer. I worked in the immigrant rights space. I work in the economic justice space around living wage. I became a labor organizer with SCIU and with home care workers and public sector workers. And I think it's the best decision that I ever made, because like once you understand that, as you all do, like how you build power, that is like this is the engine. There's so many different components that are important, but organizing is really the engine of change. There's a couple things that have changed about how I see organizing over the years, or maybe just I've kind of sharpened. One is the importance of belonging. And
Mhm.
I think that sometimes I joke that we're in this battle of like we need a big enough tent that we have scale, but we don't want it so watered down that marginalized people are getting thrown under the bus in the way that we often have. But we
Right.
also don't want, some like the other extreme is like four liberal arts majors in a coat closet talking to each other with all the right lingo. It's like and there's like no power, as
There's
my
got to
friend
be an
Ricky
in
Sten
between.
says, like 0 + 0 = 0. So it's
That's
like you
right.
figure it out. But I do think we are living in a time now where we've got these really caustic environments of performative wokeness that feel
Mm.
like in many movement spaces, it feels like some kind of mix of Mean Girls and Lord of the Flies. Like there's this
Yeah.
influx of people who are bringing maybe as the professionalization of organization has happened, you've got people coming out of like liberal arts colleges and the academy and bringing in a kind of culture that is very caustic. And Sandra
Right.
Bass, who's a leader at UC Berkeley, I interviewed her for the book. She describes it in higher education, and she says, there's like this culture where deconstructionism and tearing others down is viewed as the height of intellectualism. And I think we need to pay attention to the fact that the way you win the game in an academic setting is by one-upping people, by poking holes, by proving you're smarter. There's this
Yeah.
overdeveloped muscle of critique that's often less about getting to a clear truth that will help humanity and more about proving that you're right and you're superior. And
Mm.
in the culture of mass movements, you win the game by getting enough people unified and activated for long enough
That's
to
right.
win change. In order to do that, you have to have rigor and critique to keep people moving in the right direction, but you have to have enough grace and love and
Right.
belonging to keep people joining and staying. And so that academic teardown, it really just only alienates people. And
Right.
so, I think at their best, academic theories, they sharpen the articulation of grassroots demands, of organizing praxis, all of that. And, you know, I think at its worst, it's this perpetual deconstructionism. So how do we like find the blend? We do need theory in our work. That's important. So that's one thing. The second thing, just quickly, the change that in my thinking on organizing is that I have a stronger value of the integration of organizing as a praxis with other approaches, direct
Mm.
service, mutual aid, ceremony, art. Um, the central project of capitalism and colonization is to break us apart. It's
Mm.
borders, it's breaking us apart by identities, by religion, by race, by gender, by issue area. If we look at how siloed, right, things are, even our bodies, like we can't go to one doctor to look at us holistically. We're over here for one organ and over here for another. So there's a power in kind of re like integration, coming back to have organizing models that integrate that in the way that like we think of like a Black Panther breakfast program did, for example.
Right.
But also that we have to be careful of this trend of conflating like mutual aid, for example, in isolation with organizing. We have to remember that like if you run a food bank and you never stop to ask why people are hungry
Come
and to do
on.
something about that, then you're not actually organizing. So, building is important, but we also have to build power because we know our communities built in Tulsa, they built Chinatowns, they built beautiful things that were taken down when we did not have enough power to govern. So we have to reckon with our own discomfort of power to really claim that fully. So those are a couple of things that I think about a lot, that have kind of changed or evolved in my organizing process.
Yeah, just a couple of things, a couple complex, beautiful things. Um, I want to remind folks, so I love that you started this work as a writer, and it really shows in the book, Unrig the Game, which is what we're talking about with Vanessa Priya Daniel. And I also want to remind folks, if you have questions, I know the conversation can be mesmerizing, but please drop your questions in the chat because we definitely want to hear from you. But as we're talking, like I said, I do. It's obvious that you're a writer. This is such a beautifully written book. Like if it were, there's a tone this book could have been written in, where we got a lot of information. But I feel like we do get just so much. Yeah, so much love and energy from this book about kind of the spirit that is going to be needed to do this work. And I feel like the evolution of your thinking over your organizing career, I don't know how you would characterize it, but it feels like the work that you did with Groundswell was kind of like a culmination of all that thought of what is needed and what is possible when we are funding folks who are not just recognizing what is not working, but able to pull folks in and actually do that broader work when they're able to recognize how organizing can play well and pair well with other types of bringing folks together. And when you founded the Groundswell Fund, it seems like you were figuring out how to put more momentum behind folks who were recognizing those things and not just recognizing them, but actually doing the work. Um, what did you hope to achieve with the Groundswell Fund? Like what did you see as the aim of putting that fund together?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to unlock as many resources as possible for work that was intersectional organizing, that was organizing on the ground, building power, but dealing with race, class, gender, decolonization, not singly, but like simultaneously. And a lot of where that organizing existed was in work led by women of color, work led by queer and trans folks. And it was that surprising is also some of like the least funded work and invested in over the years. So it's like, how can we unlock resources for this? And like I had a, fantastic team that came together over the years as we built this. And, we what we set out to do was basically go into philanthropy, which is a field that at the time, I mean, this is like 2005, like thought grassroots organizing as a strategy was like planting magical beans and expecting beanstalks to grow, like really, really didn't understand it.
Mm,
Um, Felt that multi-issue organizing was like diluting power, that you get more impact if you're a single issue focus. And they didn't want to touch reproductive rights issues with a 10-foot pole. They treat them like the electric third rail. And we're like, okay, we're going to start out. We're gonna we're gonna raise money for multi-issue grassroots organizing, and we're going to center reproductive justice work to start.
yes.
I think that just the incredible, this is the power of organizing, is it's like,
Yes.
what's the Mandela quote? It's always impossible until it's done, right? And like women of color in particular making a way out of no way. And we were able to build this foundation that had super majorities of women of color and queer and trans folks of color who are former grassroots organizers, super majorities on our staff, on our board, basically
Wow.
making the decisions. And we built it from, an organization that gave out 300,000 a year to about 20 grantees, and we had two donors when we started.
Wow.
And we built it to a $26 million organization with a
Yes.
C3 and a C4. We had about 40 foundations and over 2,000 individual donors investing, and with that kind of trust where they're like turning over resources to the supermajority of former organizers to
That's
decide where
incredible.
money went. And like, so I just think solidarity is possible. That was a big lesson for me also. It's like, it offers all of us an opportunity to step into our humanity, to work together across differences of class, race, all of these things, and an opportunity to invest in these movements. And from what I see, I don't think a multiracial democracy, which is like the tagline nowadays, is possible if it's not a multiracial feminist democracy. We don't
Yeah,
get there, y'all. We do not get there without addressing patriarchy and white supremacy and these things
that's
simultaneously.
right.
And we have to fund that work. And the reality that um, the further you get towards directly confronting and seizing the power to govern, when you look at the structures available to us, you have C3s, and you have C3s with voter engagement capacity. You've got C4s, PACs, super PACs. The further you get in this direction, the more white, the more male, the more cisgender it is.
Hmm.
And we need to change that. And that was part of cracking open those resources. That's what we set out to do. And of course, we're only still beginning in that because it's been decades and decades of divestment. But I feel like that's part of it's one part of the solution, along with what everyone here is working on. So
That's an incredible accomplishment. Like from founding to where Groundswell grew. Like it's just an incredible accomplishment. Congratulations and thank you.
Thank you.
Um,
Team effort. A lot of good people putting their
oh,
shoulders to the wheel. Yeah.
yes, yes, for sure. And also your vision that you were able to bring people into. So team effort and also thanks. Your flowers delivered.
Thank
Um,
you.
but I want to talk a little bit about the book. What you just shared reminded me of one of the stories um, that came up in the book around a reproductive justice fight on the West Coast where um, a bill failed
Yes.
around abortion rights, and reproductive justice groups were bringing in other folks who said, well, let's make this about more than that. Let's make it about, and the common sense, the status quo response was, okay, so we asked for less and it didn't win. Why do you think we can ask for more and it would why would that doesn't seem like the smart thing to do? And yet it was. Can you talk a little bit about the superpowers that you name in the book? And if you would talk more about that example, I feel like I'm doing not doing it justice, but I feel like it was such a great example of some of the superpowers you describe and how it seems counterintuitive, but it's actually the path forward. It's actually the path to winning. It's actually the path to changing the world so that it takes care of all of us instead of a few of us.
Yeah. Oh, and that's such a like I love that you pulled out that story, Latanya, because it's like one of my favorites.
Such a
So
good
we
one.
have in Oregon the single best law that exists on the books in the United States for reproductive freedom. And what happened was, as you said, there was a bill put forth time and time again by kind of more traditional um, white-led organizations that were about abortion access. And they kept failing. And a set of women of color and trans folks of color came in to the process and said, let's do it, but let's go bigger. And we're going to make the bill to say it's going to provide coverage and support around reproductive health access for people. And it's going to do it regardless of your documentation, whether you're documented or not as an immigrant, and regardless of it's going to be inclusive of trans healthcare and of that status. It's being inclusive of like the full spectrum of reproductive healthcare. And what they found was after a lot of grappling, you can imagine that was not an easy
Yeah.
fight to win internally within the coalition. But what they found was that because they broadened it, because they refused to leave trans folks behind, the LGBTQ community was there. Because they refused to leave immigrants behind, the immigrant rights community was there. And so it broadened the set of people, and the bill passed by a landslide, and then
Yes.
the right wing came for it and it was defended by a landslide again.
That's right.
It was so airtight. So it's sort of counterintuitive to our thinking, which I'd say we have to get out of this low self-esteem thinking that we're
Mm,
in this moment about, well, we're going to go for the mushy middle. And if we look at like the Mamdani phenomenon, which it's all over the country, that people have an
that's right.
appetite for what's going on, that kind of courage, expansiveness, giving people something that is worth fighting for, that is about the fullness of what our communities need and deserve is an example. So I'm kind of segueing now into like these superpowers. So the three
Yeah.
superpowers in the book, these are what came up the most in my interviews with women of color leaders. So number one is boldness. And this is the conviction to go for the fullness of, what our communities need to thrive, what the planet needs to be livable. And it is such an antidote to this affliction of timidity that fascism relies on in order to
Hmm.
advance. So boldness, I mean, it's Barbara Lee is the only no vote to the Iraq War. It's like Representative Pramila Jayapal and all the sisters who were a part of getting the largest outlay of federal funding to address climate change. That we know we're seeing that slide back now, but we're going to come back with it
That's
um,
right.
at some point. It is that kind of conviction. It's a conviction to really fight in a way that inspires people. So boldness is really important. The second superpower um, is what I call 360-degree vision. So this is, the willingness to fight for against white supremacy, patriarchy, capitalism, colonialism simultaneously. Kimberly Crenshaw talked about experiencing the attack from all those forces at simultaneously intersectionality.
Right.
The Combahee River Collective talked
Yes.
about this. Shari Moraga wrote about this, and women of color have been about it when we have fought not just for fair wages, but for racial and gender equity in pay,
That's right.
not just for healthcare, but for reproductive and gender affirming healthcare. And as we look at things like patriarchy, this idea that this notion that we've had in some progressive movements that we're going to like protect the House of Liberty by just like closing the front door and just talking about bread and butter issues, which are
Yeah.
like classified as, wages and benefits, maybe. Like we're going to try to close that front door and protect the House of Liberty, but we're going to leave the side doors of transphobia and xenophobia and patriarchy open. Well, it doesn't take a smart burglar to just go around and come in the side doors. And that's the doors that they've come in. Look at what the
That's
doors they
right.
have come in
That's right.
on xenophobia and transphobia. And they've come for all of us through those doors.
That's right.
And by the way, those are bread and butter issues too. So that kind of like 360 vision, fighting in that way is really important. And then the last superpower is generosity.
Mm.
And generosity is the backbone to say, we're actually going to fight in a way where we don't throw anyone under the bus in order to win. Saying we are not leaving our trans kids or
That's
our
right.
immigrant neighbors or pregnant people or anyone behind in order to win. And that is so powerful in like jamming the gears of divide and conquer that fascists use in order to advance. So, you know, moving in that way, and we see all three of these superpowers manifest in the example that you raised, Latanya. Those are superpowers that, and I want to be clear, we're not saying in an essentialist way that they exist among all women of color because Nikki Haley and Omarosa and like whoever else, right?
Candace Owen.
Candace Owens, Nicki Minaj. I don't know what's happening with Nicki Minaj. I'm sad. We all like
It
Super.
makes me Superface is so good. Why?
Superface
Why
was so
can't we
good.
have nice things?
But so we know this is happening, and leaders within our own ranks who are
Right. Yeah.
not in clarity or integrity. So it's not about essentializing, but there is a
Right.
disproportionate use of these superpowers, and these are the superpowers that right now, particularly in this moment as we're facing authoritarianism, all of us can adopt in order to be more effective in our work.
I think that's so true. Like I think I really appreciated how how clear you were in the book about, I my research shows that these are true, or these are commonalities amongst these women of color that I've interviewed, that I've seen in the movement, and also they are not exclusive. And also, you can't just expect them. A woman of color just has these, and also these are learnable. These are skills. Like as a trainer, I love a learnable thing and demystifying a thing and saying this is how you can pick this up and strengthen your leadership by integrating it. And I think that that question of timidity is so important. You talked about it when you were labor organizing with the Iraq War, and the folks they wanted to stay with the bread and butter issues. They were like, this will be too divisive if we start talking about this. But you made this space. You were bold. You made this space, and folks started sharing all the reasons why they didn't have the experience. They didn't have the experience, maybe related to that war, but their experiences told them they had something to say, and they wanted to stand up against U.S. imperialism. So I think that timidity, it shows up in so many ways and keeps us from so many opportunities, but mostly keeps us from each other and ways that we can show up for each other. And it can also kind of be the kryptonite, right? Like I feel like sometimes I feel like the Oregon example is a moment where through difficult conversation and bringing people in, folks were like, okay, we will listen, we will take this risk, we will move together. But that doesn't always happen. What are some of the challenges and dangers that you've seen women of color in leadership face? Yeah, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's the three superpowers that surfaced in the interviews, and then there was the five things that really rose to the top across the interviews, and this is like across differences in race and and geography and sector issue area that were just so prominent in what leaders told me. These are the five things that they felt bench them in the work. And they were number one, a glass cliff, so being invited to lead an organization that's in crisis. Number two, the assumption of incompetence. Number three, the demand to mother and mammy. And number four, being given zero margin for error. And finally, number five, being abandoned when you're attacked. So let me unpack those for a minute. So the glass cliff is, um, for example, like, I mean, we could just use the example of Kamala Harris, which, we can, setting aside the very valid critique and the conversation about Gaza. I want to set that aside a minute, but I just want to talk about the fact that this is a woman of color who was invited in to mount a campaign with less time than any other candidate, and coming into a huge cleanup job, right? So that glass cliff, it looks like a leader I talked to in California who was hired, and a couple weeks into the job, the CFO invites her into their office and says, "By the way, we don't have enough money to make payroll at the end of the month." And no one had told her
Oh my God.
this. So yeah, it's like, okay, she knows because this is how it works that even though she didn't create this problem, like she's going to need to work around the clock for months in order to fix it because she will be the one who takes the fall for it. So that kind
Man.
of invitation is very, very prevalent. Assumption of incompetence is, um, you know, having to work four times as hard to be seen as half as credible as like our white male or female counterparts, and how it weathers our spirits, our health.
Yeah.
One of the most poignant stories, and I'm going to try to keep it together because this is a person who was a dear friend of mine and who just passed. And some of
Mm.
you all may know her, but Amisha Patel, who's like a absolutely kick-ass organizer out of
Yeah.
Chicago. Um, she talked about, you know, when she started chemo, that she was in a bathroom outside of a funder meeting in New York when her hair started to fall out and she knew it was coming, but she didn't feel like she could take a break. And I can't even tell you how many stories I heard from leaders. And these are folks who are prominent people who you may see on MSNBC, you see them and you don't know that they're on there in the morning and at night they're in the ER. Like just the level of weathering of health,
Mm.
from feeling like you will be discarded if you don't perform, at four times the level that your counterparts have to. This is a huge issue for folks. Um, the demand to mother and mammy, there is no issue that was a bigger lightning rod than this one when I talk to leaders. This is being told that you are mean and abrasive for ordinary levels of assertiveness that would be accepted from any other kind of leader. It's being told you're cold and unfeeling anytime you say no. It's the expectation that not only do you deliver a workplace for people that is fair and just, where people have a voice on the job and there's like, fair wages and benefits and all of those things, but that you deliver a utopia where no one ever feels a discomfort or a trigger. And then the punishment that's meted out, oftentimes in the public square, if you don't, um, zero margin for error. The error doesn't need to be real or perceived. And we've seen it again and again and again how women of color have been attacked, fired from like Claudine Gay at Harvard on down for perceptions of error, not being given the space to make mistakes, which mistakes we know are part of learning and part of winning.
Right.
And then being abandoned when you're attacked. And, I want to say this is like cuts two ways. So one way that women of color can be abandoned is by people who are kind of performing wokeness. And so they don't give a woman of color leader the feedback that we actually need in order to grow. And I always tell
Yeah.
people, not telling a woman of color leader that a train is headed her way is not actually solidarity. That's
That's right.
abandonment. And so we need to stop doing that. But the other way it shows up is that when sisters are attacked, they are then kind of just left out on the hill. And we saw this happen with the original leaders of the Women's March. So if folks remember, there were four of them, but only the three who were women of color were singled out for attack. PAC ads that were run by the NRA, where people were incited to threaten their lives. They had people showing up at their events with guns, doxing their home addresses, their families. And then they were dragged all over the internet behind these false accusations and rumors. And they said when they reached out to people in movement and no one would return their calls. People treated them like they were radioactive
Yeah.
until the New York Times broke the story that, in fact, it had been Russian bots behind a lot of that trolling.
Right.
So this experience, which of being left out on the hill to die, which is a very visceral thing that is very, very difficult for people. I have talked to sisters who had to check themselves into places for PTSD, after certain levels of this, after their lives had been threatened. I've talked to folks that didn't leave their house for a year. It is very intense when we see these things happening. So these are the 5 things that bench folks, and my hope in sharing them is that folks can become more aware of them and not reify them. When you not reify them subconsciously, and intervene when you see them happening.
Yeah. I um yeah, I think that list it hits hard every time. Amisha was one of my first supervisors in the movement. And I got to experience, when I look back on it, I was making some mistakes as a young organizer, and she just so lovingly called me in. And it was so loving, I didn't even notice that's what it was. But to watch her do her work and then her transition, like, yeah, it's awful that she didn't have the support that she so often gave other folks when she needed it,
Yeah.
or had the felt the safety to be able to take care of herself when she needed it.
Yeah.
And I know Devante has some questions for you, so I know my time is coming to a close, but I wonder, like, what are the things that you feel like we can do to best support women of color as leaders? Like, I appreciate, again, not in an essentialist way, but when we see when we see women of color in leadership who are rocking these superpowers and like have the vision to take us to places we need to go, especially in this moment. What are ways in our organizations, in the movement, um, that we can support them, bolster their leadership, keep them accountable and called in, but like also keep them supported and knowing that they have what they need to lead?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think number one is recognize the superpowers. Let's all adopt them and support sisters who are bringing them in a good way. Um, and then I think really, really checking for people, being aware, educate yourself on the 5 things that bench us, read the book, hear from people who you know and love about the pain that they've experienced in leadership, and then watch for it. It doesn't take sometimes but 1 or 2 people in a room when a leader's being taken down behind like zero margin for error to say, wait a minute, this person may need feedback on X or Y, but let's put this in the context of everything they've done right, or let's put this in the context of everything they've been up against. And is this how we would treat this if it was a white male leader? Like, there are ways to intervene on things in a way that leaders can't intervene for ourselves. So I want to encourage people to do that. The other thing is support women of color leaders who are addressing the overcorrection that we're seeing in our movements.
Mm,
Um, I think multiple things are true at once, whether we're in leadership or in other positions and movement orgs. Like, we all deserve a measure of empathy and care and grace in these times.
that's right.
And the center of gravity must always be the liberation of our community. So
Mm,
like, neither martyrdom or comfort take us to victory. Neither rigid boundaries. Um, it's like we have kind of swung between these extremes. And when I think about my time in movement, when I came in, as an organizer in like the very early aughts, it was like we've swung from kind of this extreme self-sacrifice to the collective, to this like neoliberal individualism that is in many ways indistinguishable from the core values of capitalism.
mm,
We've gone from like this focus when I came in, it's like this focus on external were kind of to the exclusion of a healthy work environment. And I remember when I was at the union, my coworker Ken slept under his desk. I mean, it's like these were not good conditions.
No.
And then we've swung the other way to where we're sometimes navel gazing so much about making the workplace as cushy as possible to the exclusion of the external work being done to excellence and to honor our communities. We have swung from, back in the day, most of us as organizers didn't even have health benefits to expecting organizations to heal all our childhood trauma. From, you know, sweeping a lot of discrimination under the carpet to, false accusations of discrimination being used as weapons to carry out vendettas against people or organizations or fleece organizations for money.
Hmm.
So, one of the things that struck me in the interviews is that women of color we are not trying to get back to the good old days because those days were never good for us,
That's right.
but we are getting killed by what's happening now. I mean, it is the pressure. If you were already under the expectation of mother and mammy, and now you got to deliver, utopian conditions and heal everyone's childhood trauma, like it is a crushing weight. So there is a way in which women of color are modeling what it means to move with love and rigor. That we have like led the way in bringing healing justice and better working conditions into organizations. But we're also saying, that, the conflation of all rigor with exploitation, of all
Hmm.
positional power with abuse, of all discomfort with harm, that is making us sloppy and unstrategic, and we need to cut it out. We need to cut it out. And so there's some boundaries here. There's some asking of tough questions. And, I say like we've, firefighters, if we think of like a fire department, would never hire people. And the people, once they're hired, will say, well, now that I'm here, I really want to ring the little bell on the truck and I'm down to be in the calendar. But, hot things, they trigger me. So it's like we cannot
Right.
move
Right.
this way and accommodate this way in movement. We are up against forces that are literally trying to kill us. This is not Nordstrom. So people need to raise their hand and do the work. And we can make workplaces safe and sustainable and all of that kind of stuff. And so we have to balance the empathy and care for movement workers, for leaders, with the kind of healthy boundaries and the center of gravity that keeps the liberation of our communities at the center. And when you see women of color leading in that way and trying to do that, support them, have their back.
Hmm. Yes. Thank you so much. I feel like I could talk to you about that forever. I think that balance between accountability um, and getting the work done, right? That we are in this work because there is work to do, is just is huge. I want to hand it to Devante, but I think we have one question from the audience that we're gonna share. Um, I believe Emily Barcy shared a question. She shared, "Thank you for writing the book. I loved it and am always recommending it to others. I was especially interested in your conversation with Linda Burnham about the need for more political education among staff of our organizations. I'm curious about whether you ran across examples of organizations that are doing this well and what kinds of approaches they've used."
Mm. Emily, thank you. Such a great question. Linda Burnham, one of our beloved movement elders, who's also a yoga practitioner, and talked about core strength. Like when you strengthen the core of your physical body, it enables you to move in a stronger way. And when you strengthen the core of your praxis and political education being part of that, it allows us to hold steady when we're, if you think about being on a train car, in the environment we're in, you have to use your core strength if you can't hold on to a handrail. So political education is part of that. I think there are great examples of political education out there. I mean, certainly People's Action is uh, a lot of great training in movement, in the history of our movements, in the history of organizing, and the praxis of organizing. I think Grassroots Power Project, which full disclosure, I'm like a very proud board member of that organization, but some of just like the deep um, work and offering folks lessons, like multi-generational lessons from movements in this country, but also movements around the world. So putting us in a global context has been great. I think Grassroots Global Justice, for example, talks a lot about feminist movements in the global South and what we can learn. So, yeah, I mean, I think political education is really important to um, just like understanding the terrain and the context we're in and having clarity. One of the things that Linda said about political ed and how it translates into how we talk about our organizations is we actually have to be clear about what we're inviting people into. And, just to paraphrase her, it's like we can't like not explain with clarity what our politic is and then get mad when people don't align with it when they come into our organizations and why there's friction. And like the elaboration that I would add on that is like, sometimes we put these glib mission statements on our websites and then we hire people based on that or in a job description. And then you end up with, a set of folks which you want diverse thinking because steel sharpens steel and we don't want everyone who always agrees. But if you get too disparate, then it's like you've got, folks who are integrationists and in with folks that have like a Black nationalist point of view. You've got people who are busting the gender binary in with people who are throwing gender reveal parties on the weekend. Like you
Mhm.
do have to have some screening to make sure you're at least in the same universe and aligned behind the politics. So that's also an important part of it. And yeah. So thank you, Emily, for the question.
Yes. Emily Blank. Sorry, I got your last name wrong. But Emily Blank, thank you for the question. And if other folks, as you are hearing the conversation, if you've already read the book and this is your chance to share your question with Vanessa. So feel free to drop those in the chat. Devante, I know you have some questions that you want to ask. So I'm gonna pass it over to you.
For sure. Thank you so much. Latanya, whenever like you're asking the questions, I'm always like so tuned in and then I forget that I have to host this thing also. And I was like, oh, I have questions I have to ask too. Nah, so this has been great. And just like Latanya said, yeah, even if you haven't read the book, if you have a question that you have, just throw it in the chat and we got plenty of time to go over a couple of questions. And Vanessa, I super appreciate you for being here as well. This has been great convo and the time has been flying for sure.
It's a pleasure. These are wonderful, wonderful questions. Appreciate you.
Of course, no problem. And then just for my couple line of questions also, um, for me, whenever I was reading the book, it really wasn't until I was doing really hosting this podcast where I was just like starting to read more organizer based books. And whenever I was reading this book, I was just like, it felt like a book more for more people than just organizers. And it's really, like it said in the front of the book, it says what women of color can teach everyone about winning. And I feel like that should have been like in all bold and like underlined because that's what it felt like to me whenever I was reading the book, So what was your intention when you were writing the book?
Well, I wrote the book because I want to win. I have two daughters. I want to win like I want them to have a democracy to live in and a planet to live on. And, to me, I'm just really clear that no team that's serious about winning benches its MVPs for no good reason, particularly in the clutch moment of a big game. And we are in, the fight of our lives against fascism in this country. We need our full strength. So much of that strength comes from our best and brightest leaders, many of whom are women of color. And, if we look at, I say that women of color are the MVPs of social change. And what makes anyone an MVP of anything is number one, you put points on the board. And number two, you have outstanding skills and abilities. And if we tell the truth, a lot of the points that progressives count on our side of the scoreboard throughout history would not exist if women of color had not put them there, particularly Black women in this country. So when we look at the fact that there's 30 million kids who, don't learn hungry because they have free breakfast and lunch, that's because of the Black women who ran the Black Panther breakfast program. When we look at even a lot of the wins that we've had, that we're grieving the rollback of now, like the rollback of the largest outlay of federal funding to address climate change, for example, the Voting Rights Act, like a lot of those wins were brought to us by women of color. And, as bad as things are now, like, can we imagine how much worse it would be if women of color hadn't led the way to defeat Trump in 2020? That we hadn't had 4 years to catch our breath at least before coming into what we're in now. So, So yeah, I wrote the book because it is not a book about just like there's mistreatment of these leaders, and so be nice out of the goodness of your heart. Like, yes, do that. But also, um, it's like when I get a little when we get grumpy towards our kids a little bit, we say like, when you play me, you play yourself.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
like,
Hmm.
it's like when we play our best, some of our best and brightest leaders, we play ourselves. Like we are, our movements are losing in part because we are failing to honor the embarrassment of riches that we have in these leaders and value it and follow like some of the superpowers that they've been coming out front and talking about in this moment. I can I just like say a moment about can I say a word about the moment that we're in?
Please, please do.
Yeah, I mean, I can refer to the moment we're in as the Great Escape, because and the reason I refer to it like this is, um, you know, I think that like they say the most dangerous period of time for a survivor of domestic violence is when they attempt to leave their abuser. Over
Hmm.
the past 20 years in this country, we have arguably witnessed one of the greatest attempts of oppressed groups to flee the abuser side of the US. From Occupy to Standing Rock to the Women's March to the uprisings following the murder of George Floyd, to the sea change and culture shift we've seen around LGBT rights, oppressed people have been making an epic break for it. And we know that, so it should come as no surprise that we are like in this backlash, right? And we've entered this very dangerous time. So survivors who flee their abusers, they typically meet with two types of backlash. The first is from the abuser. The second is from the people around them who are run by fear and who tell them to stop running, to stop speaking, and to go back. And that backlash is scary. And that's why a lot of us are feeling fear right now. There's so much fear. And there's a lot of ways to deal with that fear. But one thing is for certain is that the answer is never, ever to run back into the abuser's house. It is always, always to keep going towards freedom. And in order to do that, we've got to out-organize both the abuser who's pursuing us, which is the MAGAs of the world, and we've got to out-organize the cowards and the people who are off key in our own ranks, who would have us turn back. And that includes the establishment Democratic Party, the Cuomo's of the world, it includes like most of philanthropy, it includes what I kind of call the Karens and Kens of movements, who are mired in neoliberal thinking and who have lost the plot of why we are here and how damn serious it is outside. So we have to refuse to make the same mistake that we have made with cowards and unclear folks following every other break for freedom that we have seen in this country, where, we see that cowards handled the backlash to Reconstruction by acquiescing to Jim Crow, to the gains of the civil rights movement, that backlash, they handled that by not only condoning, but, Bill Clinton help ushering in the war on drugs and mass incarceration and like laying the foundation for the militarism that we're seeing in places like Minneapolis and with ICE around the country today. So, we see it in the DNC report. What was that? Telling us to abandon identity politics, which we know is code for abandoning, marginalized communities. So we've got to out-organize these people. And we have to protect the brave ones, who have led us out of the abuser's house in the first place. And I do want to say, like, as a brown woman, it is important for me to say that there is no group that surpasses the political and moral clarity in leading us out of the abuser's house than Black women. So we need to check for these sisters and protect them, get around them, make sure they have the resources they need. And, then the concentric circles, we have to check for leaders and organizations, whether it's Southern Poverty Law Center or other folks who are under attack, um, supporting orgs like People Action who are doing the brave work, so that we can stay brave. And then we have to listen. We have to listen to the people who are keeping us bold and brave, and women of color leaders who are effective. The wisdom they're bringing is a core part of that. Thank you for letting me
No,
go
for
on
sure.
that tangent.
That's 100% what you're here for, and I'm all for it. And like Tim, I saw Tim putting putting quotations what you said. Protect the brave ones. We need that on a shirt, like literally ASAP. And And that's one thing that I could definitely relate to as well because um whether it's my mother or my grandmother or my wife, they're all black women. And, what I've learned through, just through my walk of life, it's like if you listen the first time, then everything else will be perfectly fine. Because as soon as you deviate from that, that's whenever you get in a little bit of trouble. And we're seeing that, in today's day and age as well.
And if you
You
don't
know,
listen, you will feel. That's another one.
Yes, yes, 1000%. And for me, if it was like, my mother, my grandmother, I felt it more on my butt than anything else, so
Yeah.
one of the other things that you put in your book as well is you talk about the importance to our journey of not just telling the truth, but telling the whole truth. I can relate to that 1000%. And what does that mean and why does that matter?
Hmm. Well, I mean, I think it goes back to what I was saying about, colonization and capitalism breaking us apart, breaking the whole. Like that's the central project of it. So, this reintegration of telling the whole truth is part of how we decolonize. It's part of how we, Norma Wong, who I know many of us know and love, our elder Norma Wong, who talks about remembering, it's like we're both remembering like our like indigenous ways, but we're also remembering, putting the pieces back together. And so that's why it is important to work in a integrated, multi-issue, intersectional way. It's important to bring in, race, class, and gender together. I think about the gender piece because I feel like this falls out a lot, even from like organizations that are led by folks of color who are really strong on racial justice. I ask the question, like, can we imagine what this country, what the planet would look like if the abuse of women and girls disqualified you from leadership positions? Can we just sit with that for a minute? What would our world look like if those people were disqualified from leadership? Um, what if we had listened to women of color and to gender nonconforming folks and folks who are like affected the most by gender discrimination? And if we had dealt with gender at in our societies and at home, and you know, what if we didn't have societies who are filled with people who had been programmed with no intervention to respond to their fear of things like economic instability that we're seeing in the world by turning towards strong men, these abusive father figures to protect us? What would the world look like in terms of how many dictators there might not be if we had done that? So I think that hindsight is 2020, but there is absolutely no path to multiracial democracy without dealing with patriarchy alongside race and class, and you can't get there without it. And we need to tell that whole truth and bring our whole selves to the work. And I will say, the more you do that, it's counterintuitive, but I think the more people see themselves in your organization and your organizing and your campaigns and your work because there's more points of connectivity. So contrary to being a dilution or a distraction, it actually creates more entry points for people to come in and feel that their full selves and the full selves of everyone that they know and love are seen and welcomed and supported and fought for.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And earlier whenever you were talking with Latanya, I know you had a quote that you said, a Nelson Mandela quote that you said. And
Mm.
one of the quotes that you put in your book is one that stood out for me as well. It came from James Baldwin. And in the book it says, it took many years of vomiting up all the filth I'd been taught about myself and half believed before I was able to walk on the earth as though I had a right to be here. That
Mm.
that quote, we can sit with that for like a quick second. Like that quote was incredible. And that's something that we as organizers and just as people who walk the earth can all relate to. So what does that mean to you?
Oof. I mean, James Baldwin is like one of the people who I just love from the bottom of my heart. One of my
Hmm.
movement
Hmm.
ancestors. I feel like with this quote, and there's just ways in which he like reaches inside my heart and like keeping me from being free. And it is so beautiful. I have this other quote by him here too that's kind of related on my desk. You have to decide who you are and force the world to deal with you, not with its idea of you. So, I mean,
Mm,
I think that when we show up this way, when we show up having done the work to, to release the things that make us hate ourselves, that we're programmed to hate ourselves. Um, when we have done that work and we show up with love, when we show up teaching people how to treat us, when we show up not abandoning ourselves, when we show up deciding who we are and forcing the world to deal with who we are, it gives other people permission to be free and it models what freedom looks like in a way that just talking about the policy or, the thing doesn't. So, for example, I'm not transgender, but when I watch Alok, who some people may know, when I watch Alok speak and the way they show up as their authentic self and deconstruct gender, I feel freer after watching some of those clips. We are all subject to programming. Like we have to actively undo it towards others and towards ourselves. And, I think doing that work is really important. And the self work is also important because we're in a time when a lot of us can get dysregulated. This is just, we're human. It is hard outside, y'all. So we have to do the work to show up in a way that is managing our dysregulation. I go to therapy every week. I meditate. We have to actually up the pouring in into our sleep, our meditation, our therapy, our mantras, like our exercise, all the things that we need to be doing so that we can actually show up in a way that isn't carrying all of that, the things that we've been told about ourselves into the space in ways that then become caustic and destructive to ourselves and others. So, yes, James Baldwin all day long.
yes, all day long. And another thing that you talk about is what you call the cage. We shout and clamor for freedom, but when the cage door swings open, we don't know what to do, how to embrace our power. You say this shows up especially for women of color. So can you explain a little bit more on that?
Yeah. So what I mean by the cage is, oppression is painful, and we talk a lot about how we want to get free. Oppression is really painful, and surviving it and fighting it is painful, but damn it if it isn't familiar. We know
Mm,
how to survive oppression. We've done it for centuries, some of us with our ancestors, right? Freedom is unknown. And so we actually have to reckon with a different kind of fear about what it means to step into the unfamiliar and the unknown. And that even if we say that's what we want, there may be subconscious ways that we're sabotaging that. And I see it, just speaking first broadly about the left and movement, I think we see it in our discomfort with power. We have got to reckon with our discomfort with power. We see it in the reason that we haven't fought harder for the power to govern. That for years we were locked in a debate about whether we should even engage the electoral system when that system is like deciding our lives. It's like um, when we step on the outside and throw stones, and we would rather go and lobby an elected official that we didn't put there who doesn't give a shit about our communities to try to get them to do the right thing than we would just put someone in that position that comes from us and that we can hold accountable to us and that loves us. That is a shift into power. We see it in the fetishization sometimes of what's small and scrappy, and nothing wrong with small and scrappy, y'all. So don't get it twisted when I'm saying, because a lot of times the radical work comes out of small and scrappy. SNCC was small and scrappy. The Panthers were small and scrappy at the beginning. But we also need scale. And if we condemn things and mistrust them the minute they scale, we ain't never gonna be able to get to the threshold of mass engagement that we need to surmount fascism. And so that kind of, we can't fetishize the small and just go towards that. And then for women of color, and I've said this and it's controversial, but I will say it again. for the people in the back that some of the most patriarchal spaces I've ever worked in are feminist spaces that are predominantly women, where we don't actually need cis men in the room to police us. It is, we are policing each other into smallness and saying, how dare she do that? Who does she think she is? And demanding that we, qualify every statement and, fluff people up and not be too much. And, I have seen women viciously tear a sister down who dares to fly and be in her full power. I have seen women of color build organizations where they admit they're better compensated and cared for than any place they've ever worked, and then watch people create drama and complaints that tear that space to shreds. So we have to, this is again the reckoning of as Baldwin said, we have to vomit up the filth. We have to reckon with and not reify the internalized patriarchy and white supremacy and all of that that's within us, so that we can actually get out of the fucking cage. And I know that we want to get out of it, and we want our kids to be free of it, and we deserve it, and our people deserve it.
Yeah, 100%. No, I agree with that. 100%. And I have one more question before I get to one of the questions from the chat. I've enjoyed this so much. Like I said, I'll have more questions, but maybe part two. Who knows? But the last question that I have is you talk about the importance of having the right to fail. This is something in the book that like really like hit home for me as well, because like I'm always hard on myself. So you talk about having the right to fail and the importance of self-forgiveness. And why does that matter, and how can that keep us from burning out?
Yeah, I think that a lot of us, but like the women of color that I know, leaders, it's like there's no one that's harder on us than ourselves. And I talk about this in the book. It's like even if we learn how to put good people around us, and I talk about building your squad and building people with backbone around you who are, they're not yes people, but they're gonna critique you and kick the tires and help you with your thinking and all of that and challenge you. But they are also they're gonna have your back and have backbone even when it's inconvenient. But then the question is, well, who's going to save us from ourselves, because we are so hard on ourselves. I had back surgery in my 30s because of overwork from organizing. And I one of the things that I contemplated when I was like laid out flat recovering was that if you make a meal, like say you make a soup that's to feed a group of people, and into that soup you put all kinds of things with pesticides and preservatives and like chemicals and unhealthy things, like that might fill people's belly, but over time it's actually going to make them sick because it's not nourishing them, because what you put into it was unhealthy. By the same token, if what we are putting into our movements and our campaigns is nothing but stress and burnout and dragging ourselves internally and not having forgiveness or grace for ourselves, not allowing ourselves the room to fail, which we know the business sector understands that if you're not failing, you're never going to succeed, because you actually have to fail a certain number of times in order to succeed. It's so important. Like if we're putting all of that into the movements that we're creating, into like what we're feeding the people, we're not nourishing folks, like ultimately we're going to get sick. And I think we have gotten sick in a lot of our organizations by working in this way. So, I think figuring out how to bring in and normalize, a culture where there is room to fail doesn't mean that we make the same mistake over and over again. We want to make a new mistake. Doesn't mean that we don't refine and don't have rigor about course correcting, but it means we do our absolute best strategic work, and then we give ourselves grace.
No, I agree with that 100%. Especially when you said, don't be afraid to get messy. It always makes me go back to the Magic School Bus, with Miss Frizzle. Take
Yeah.
chances, make mistakes, get messy. So I super agree with that 100%. And that's all I have, but I do want to get into some questions from the chat. Like I said, I super appreciate this conversation that we've had, and I hope everybody in the chat has had a great time as well. So this question comes from Hazzy Reeves. Shout out to Hazzy, I see you. What is the scariest part of this moment, and what gives you hope that we will not be mired in it for generations?
Oh man, what a good question. Is it Hazzy? Thank you, Hazzy, for that question. Okay. I think the scariest part of this moment for me is the way people go sideways when they are walking ineffectively with their fear. And and even scarier than that is when people become dysregulated and go sideways with it and start behaving in destructive ways or in off-topic ways, ways that are derailing our movements. What's scary is that what you often have is you have two things happen in the room. So you've got like that phenomenon happening. You've got like oftentimes two camps of people. One camp that tries to intervene and lovingly call in and course correct and keep us on track. And another camp of people who kind of get into this like empathy without discernment and like fight for there to be more space for people to kind of splash around in that. And I think figuring out that is really dangerous. It's like derailing a lot of our efforts right now. And I think we have to keep disciplined in this moment. We cannot allow people when we're in a bunker who are like, spinning out and um, you know, attacking each other, like behaving in dysregulated ways or like pushing us to do the cowardly thing. I mean, philanthropy is a great example right now. We can look at what's happening in philanthropy, particularly in the foundation world. Everyone, like the retreat that's happening, the obeying in advance around like anything that's construed as DEI, like all of that shit that's happening in philanthropy, that is the scary part and leaving it unchecked. So we actually have to have discipline about making sure enough of us are intervening and seeing it as our job to intervene when we see things derailing. And it's not about attacking people back or excommunicating, but it is a loving call in and it is firm. It is a firm call in. Um, and I think that we need to figure out how to do that in an environment where it is also scary to call people in because of cancellation and everything. I always say, like, the expression, anyone can have a child, but not everyone raises a child. I feel like my movement elders raised me. And that meant that it wasn't all just gold stars and stickers and prizes for things I did right. It was also putting a hand around, arm around my shoulder and say, let's go for a walk after that meeting and talk about what you did wrong in there and how you need to not show up that way because it's dysregulating the group, like we need to be able to call in and keep ourselves reminded. We all have our moments where we need that reminder to keep, our eyes set on freedom, to keep liberation as the center of gravity instead of our own comfort or pain or whatever it may be.
I love it. That was a great question. Thank you so much, Hazzy, and that was a great answer as well. And that's all I got. So I appreciate you. And I'm gonna swing it back over to Latanya.
Thanks,
How you feeling?
Devontae.
Oh my goodness. Vanessa, can we please show some love? Throw up an emoji, come off mute. Just show some love for all of the wisdom and gems that got dropped in today's conversation. I wanted to just grab my head and scream a little bit out of delight because it was just such a powerful and rich conversation. Please visit Vanessa's site at www.vanessapriyadaniel.com. And if you add that hash or that forward slash and contact, you can have her come and share her wisdom and smarts with your organization, with your group. This is a deep conversation that we need to have to figure out how to get out of this moment and stay out of this moment. So please use one of these QR codes that Tim is throwing up, or visit the website to bring her to your space to continue having this conversation. Vanessa, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Latanya. This was wonderful. Really enjoyed it. Appreciate you. Cheering
Appreciate
people's
you.
action on always.
For
Thank
sure.
you.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I know that we are at the end of our time, Devante. So before we go, I do want to remind folks that yes, we have come a long way, but we are actually far from finished. We are going to be back next month with Stephanie Luce, co-author of Practical Radicals: 7 Strategies to Change the World. So please, how we could sign up for that.
Yeah, of course. We'll throw it in the chat for you as well. And if you want to sign up for that, make sure you go to peoplesaction.org/biggerwe. Yeah, we need y'all next month. Like I said, it's going to be really really great. Like I said, we're having a conversation next month with Stephanie Luce. That's the 28th from 2 to 3:30 Eastern time, just like today. So yeah, so sign up if you haven't yet. Like I said, it's in the chat. Shouts out to you, Tim. And yeah, that's all I got. So I'll swing it back over to you, Latanya.
Okay, well, thank you, Devante. Thank you to Sulma, who shared with us earlier. Thank you, Vanessa. Um, I'm just going to say it one more time, vanessapriyadaniel.com. Please visit. And that's what we have for you today. So I hope you will all come back to Building the Bigger We Book Club for more. Our movement is about showing up for each other, especially when things get rough. Things may get rough before they start to get better. I think many of us feel that in this moment right now. So we're going to need each other in the next few months, in the next few years, probably for the rest of our lives. So thank you for showing up in this moment for each other, for the work. And as we show up for each other, we're going to need strategy. We're going to need to listen to folks that have bold vision, who have a 360 perspective, who are being generous in their vision and in their work, which is why I'm excited about the conversation that we just had about our next guest, Stephanie Luce. Her book with Deepak Bhargava, just like the book that we just talked about with Vanessa, um, Stephanie talks about she's talked with leaders from across our movement, including some of the folks that you know in the People's Action family. She distills the most effective strategies in this moment of rising authoritarianism. You will not want to miss this conversation. So thank you again, and please join us back here next month. We can't wait to hear what questions you have, and we can't wait for you to join the conversation. Thank you all so much. Have a great Friday. Have a great week. We'll see you next month.